What if the biggest XRP catalyst isn't a new partnership, a new bank deal, or even another ETF? What if it's a combination of regulatory clarity, institutional accumulation, and a massive shift happening across the entire financial system at the same time? Because right now, there are several developments taking place that many XRP investors believe could completely change the way XRP is viewed over the next few years. And here's what makes this so important. Some investors are still looking at XRP as if it's the same asset it was a few years ago. But behind the scenes, real-world asset tokenization is accelerating, institutions continue accumulating, and regulatory clarity appears closer than ever before. And later in this video, we'll look at one specific development tied to the Clarity Act that many believe could become one of the biggest catalysts XRP has ever seen. Let's break it down. One of the questions I hear all the time is simple. Why are so many long-term XRP investors still so bullish? After everything that's happened over the past few years, after the lawsuit, after the delays, after the constant market uncertainty, why do some people remain more confident than ever? For many investors, the answer comes down to where they believe the financial system is heading. Because right now, it feels like we're approaching a major turning point. Regulatory discussions are accelerating, tokenization continues expanding, and many believe the Clarity Act could finally provide the framework that institutions have been waiting for. Now, nobody knows exactly how fast things will move, but if regulatory clarity arrives, many expect applications and development across the digital asset space to accelerate dramatically. Some projects may move immediately, others may take longer to build and scale. But the moment clarity exists, the conversation changes. And that's why many XRP investors are paying close attention to the months ahead. But here's where it gets interesting. One statistic continues standing out. The XRP ledger now has billions of dollars connected to real-world asset tokenization activity, a figure that many supporters point to as evidence that XRP's future may be much larger than simple cross-border payments alone. Now, don't get me wrong, cross-border payments remain one of XRP's core use cases. That's how many people first discovered XRP. But increasingly, the conversation is shifting toward tokenization. Because when people talk about tokenizing real-world assets, they're talking about far more than just real estate. They're talking about commodities, they're talking about equities, they're talking about bonds, and perhaps most importantly, they're talking about derivatives. And the scale of those markets is difficult for most people to even comprehend. This is where many XRP supporters believe the XRP ledger could play a much larger role in the future. Because assets can be represented on-chain, transferred efficiently, and settled in seconds. And that's the type of infrastructure many believe the next generation of financial markets will require. Now, whether someone agrees with that view or not, one thing continues attracting attention: institutional accumulation. Because if you spend time looking at blockchain data and large wallet activity, many investors point out that some of the biggest XRP wallets continue growing. And naturally, that leads to one question: why? Why would large holders continue accumulating if they believed XRP had no future? Many supporters believe the answer is simple. They see utility, they see adoption, and they see opportunities that they believe haven't fully materialized yet. But that's not the part most investors are talking about. Because one section of the Clarity Act could end up becoming one of the most closely watched developments for XRP moving forward. Now, this is where the conversation becomes even more interesting. Because one aspect of the Clarity Act continues getting attention from XRP investors. Many supporters have focused on provisions that discuss how digital assets can qualify as sufficiently decentralized and mature blockchain networks. And one discussion that keeps coming up is the impact those rules could potentially have on large holders and major stakeholders. For XRP investors, that naturally leads to questions about Ripple's holdings and the long-term distribution of XRP. Now, nobody knows exactly how every part of this process will play out, but many investors believe that as regulatory clarity arrives, we'll finally begin getting answers to questions that have existed for years. Questions about escrow, questions about long-term distribution, questions about institutional allocations, and questions about how XRP supply ultimately integrates into the broader financial system. And that's why so many people are watching this closely. Because clarity doesn't just affect regulation, clarity affects confidence. And confidence is often what drives capital into markets. But here's the part many newer investors don't fully understand. Markets rarely move the way people expect. When everyone becomes convinced something can only go higher, that's often when volatility appears. And when everyone becomes convinced something is dead, that's often when opportunity starts showing up. We've seen this cycle repeat throughout financial history. We've seen it in stocks, we've seen it in commodities, and we've certainly seen it in crypto. That's why many experienced investors spend less time focusing on headlines and more time focusing on long-term trends. And when they look at the trends today, they see several major pieces coming together at once. Regulatory clarity moving closer, institutional participation increasing, tokenization accelerating, and global financial infrastructure gradually moving toward blockchain-based systems. Individually, each one of those developments is significant. Together, they become difficult to ignore. And this next point may be the most important of all. Many people still evaluate XRP based on today's market. They look at current adoption, current liquidity, current regulations, current infrastructure. But long-term investors are often looking at where they believe things are heading 5 years from now rather than where they stand today. Because if tokenization expands the way many institutions expect, if digital assets become integrated into traditional finance, if real-world assets continue moving on-chain, then the entire conversation around utility could look very different from what it does right now. That's why some investors remain extremely bullish despite all the volatility, not because of what XRP is today, but because of what they believe it could become. Now, does that mean the road will be smooth? Absolutely not. Markets never move in a straight line. There will be corrections, there will be fear, there will be headlines that create uncertainty, and there will always be people saying it can never happen. But that's true of every major technological shift in history. Most people don't believe it until it's already happening, and that's exactly why so many XRP supporters continue paying attention to the bigger picture instead of the day-to-day noise. Because from their perspective, the dominoes continue falling. Regulation is advancing, institutional interest continues growing, and tokenization is no longer a theory. It's already happening. Whether it unfolds as quickly as some expect remains to be seen, but one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The next phase of digital assets may look very different from the last one, and if that happens, many believe XRP could be positioned right in the middle of it. So while short-term price action will always grab the headlines, long-term investors are watching something much bigger. They're watching the evolution of the financial system itself, and that's ultimately why so many remain bullish on XRP today. Let me know what you think. Do you believe regulatory clarity and tokenization are the catalysts that could drive the next major phase for XRP? Or do you think the market is still missing something bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's update, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more XRP coverage right here on XRP Update. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.